Hello everyone, I'm going to be talking about objects today, and objects generation is going to be the last of the basics for RM scripting. It is designed for placing player objects, resources, and the like on the map. It is the last section that gets generated in the script. Most of the time it's going to be the largest section in the script, but also the most repetitive, and that means less typing and more copying and pasting. So to start off the section, it looks like this. And there is only one command in all of objects generation, and that is this. Create object, leave a space, and then specify the object's name. A complete list of names that are useful to use are in the new RMS guide, but you'll find that a lot of the names you're going to be using are rather intuitive, and we'll see that later. Okay, so object commands have a lot of attributes, but it's unlikely that you're going to have a command that includes all of them. So these are the attributes. I'm going to explain what each of these do. So the number of objects and number of groups are the base starting objects that will appear with a command. And they can change based on how you decide to scale them. Setting place for every player assigns one of these sets, if you will, to every player in the game. And that includes the number of groups. So say, for example, if you wanted one group of something for 8 players, you're not going to specify 8 groups, you're going to specify one group, but set place for every player. Scaling to map size will increase the number of objects based on map size. Unless the number of groups are defined, then the number of groups will increase, and the number of objects in each group will remain constant. Scaling to player number is similar to setting place for every player. The difference is that the respective objects are not assigned to a specific player, and that comes into play when constraining the distances of objects. Okay, so the first distance attributes to consider are these, the min and max distance to players. Min distance tells objects to stay a certain distance away from the center of all the players' lands. Max distance keeps players' objects from spawning too far from their bases, and that only works if you have set place for every player. All right. These next 4 attributes define different ways to group objects. So, for example, you can set tight grouping, which tells all the objects in a group to spawn directly adjacent to one another, and you see that used in gold, stone, and forage bushes. You can set loose grouping, which tells objects to stay close to each other but not necessarily touching, and that's used for grouping sheep, deer, and stuff like that. Or you can specify neither of those, and objects in the group can be as close together or as far apart as the other attributes allow. And we'll see how all of this looks later on. Alright. Group placement radius defines how big or small a space to fit all the objects in that particular group in. And group variance lets the number of objects in a group vary. So the objects in each group will range from the base number of objects to the base number minus the group variance. So, for example, if you have specified 6 objects with a variance of 2, that means between 4 and 6 objects will be created per group. Okay, this attribute, set Gaia object only, forces the objects in that command to be Gaia, and that is necessary for every personal object that isn't initially controlled by the players. Okay, so assigned resources to the players need this attribute, while things that are not don't need to have this. Okay, so now we have some more spacing commands. Min distance group placement tells any object command created after this one to stay a certain distance away from it, and it doesn't affect this object's own placement relative to the other objects on the map. So it's important to keep that in mind. Order matters when using this attribute. Temp min distance group placement specifies the distance that the individual objects in this command need to stay apart from one another. And that is, unless the number of groups is defined, then the groups will stay apart from each other rather than the individual objects. And also keep in mind this attribute doesn't apply to objects belonging to different players. And that means if you specify player 1's objects to stay apart from each other, they don't necessarily have to stay away from the same objects belonging to player 2, etc. Right. Max distance to other zones keeps objects from spawning too close to another zone, and that's usually useful for keeping things away from the shoreline when you're working with water maps. And finally, we have this attribute, which specifies a terrain that the object needs to be placed on. And there's actually one more. Resource delta, that allows you to change the base number of resources in a specific object. So if you want more resources, type the value you want added, and if you want less resources, type a negative value. Okay, so that's quite a lot of stuff. The idea behind this is that player objects and resources on the map are comprised of many of these commands. Many resource engines are very similar from map to map. If you wanted to get really lazy, you can go into the game's data folder, game data x1, find where it says standard resources, and just copy and paste this section into the map. But it's usually a better idea to have a resource engine that is more specific to your particular map. And we'll take a look at our sample and see how that looks like. Okay, so these are the objects for the map we've been using. It starts with players' personal objects, so town center, villager, scout. They're all fairly intuitive names, and notice their attributes. All they have are set place for every player and min and max distance to players. So out of all the attributes that are available for object commands, we are only using the 3. And in game, also it's important to notice that the game automatically creates the correct number of starting villagers on the map without us having to specify. So for example, the Chinese have 6, and it also knows to replace scouts with eagles for Aztecs and Mayans automatically. So next we're going to be specifying the player's specific resources. So all of these commands will be assigned to each player, and they'll have the set place for every player attribute. Okay, so we're going to start with the stone, which has more attributes than anything else. So in this command we have the number of objects as well as the number of groups defined. Also, tight grouping is set, so everything will stay close together. And we've also set as Gaia object only, since the players are not controlling these objects while still being assigned to them. Okay, so that is what this looks like. See the stone piles. And also notice that we specified some other distance attributes. So the min distance group placement of 3 keeps every object command after this from being too close to the stone. And temp min distance group placement of 7 keeps the individual groups of stone piles at least 7 tiles away from each other. So that's what that does. Okay, so let's see what we've got next. Alright, we've got sheep coming next that are set with a loose grouping instead of tight grouping. We've got forage bushes, also tightly grouped. And notice we've also have the group placement radius defined. So seeing as we have 6 objects in this group, this will just prevent them from forming all 6 objects in a straight line, and it's going to fit them into a smaller area. Boars have no grouping set, so they're not loosely grouped or tightly grouped. So that means that they can stay as close together or as far apart as the other attributes allow. So in this case, they're far apart, whereas, say, over here, they're much closer together. Okay, and next, we've got deers, similar to sheep, which are also loosely grouped. And finishing off the player-specific objects, we have straggler trees, which are standard for probably almost every map you'll see. All right. Coming after those, we have the general objects on our map, which are not assigned to any specific player. All right. So the gold in the middle has a terrain-specific command, which makes it only able to be placed in the center. And notice that this command doesn't need to be set as a guy object, since it's scaled to map size rather than set for every player. You've also got palm trees created also in the middle, purely for aesthetic purposes. We have relics that have no scaling whatsoever, so there's always going to be 5 and only 5 created with each generation. We've got shorefish and big fish, also scaled to map size. And also notice this attribute we have here, max distance to other zones. This just keeps the big fish from being too close to the shoreline. So we have our gold and palm trees in the middle. We have our fish. Notice that the big fish avoid being too close to the shoreline. So that's how that works. And finally, what we have to end the objects generation is the special case for Regicide. This is standard for almost every map you'll see as well. It just adds extra villagers, a king, and a castle to the map, only if Regicide mode is active. Okay, so that just about wraps up the basics to RM scripting. As always, if you have questions, feel free to ask. Also, if you have ideas for other aspects of scripting that you'd like to know, you can let me know. I plan on making more videos to show general tips and tricks for more of the nitty-gritty stuff that's involved with this. So until then, thank you for watching, and I'll see you later.